Good morning. Good morning. Now you're completely Italian. We're running late. So all Italians are late, so that's absolutely there. How is everybody feeling, first of all? No, I cannot hear you. How is everybody feeling? Good. Did you enjoy pane e Nutella? Okay, I ate some. Do I have any chocolate on my mouth? Oh, I'm okay? Okay, good. For me, it was the best part of the day, but definitely for you was all the engagement and the activities that you've done this morning. I would like to ask the green shirts that I see. I know you want to sit wherever you want. I'm going to have to ask you to find your space, not now, but in general, you should try to be as much as you can together with your colleagues. I think that makes a lot of sense. Okay? So we're very thrilled. We're very honored that we're doing a little bit of history every single day here in GYTS, because we have two fantastic girls, and Amy and Ella, that you met because they also represent the UK in the Global Youth Tourism Summit. Amy and Ella have a very, very special story that we actually discovered on Instagram, and I have to say, I have to also blame Masha for that, because we were doing a list rundown of trying to identify all the young people that were really trying to make a difference when it came to tourism, to climate change, to awareness, to Agenda 2030. And then we fell in love because, and I'm sure you did too, because they're absolutely fantastic. And they came all the way from England. They're going to be with us until the end of the Global Youth Tourism Summit. But they have a lot of things to share with you. They have a foundation called Kids Against Plastic, and they're going to be telling everything about their activity with you. Obviously, you have the pleasure to continue the conversation because you're all engaged. So I really encourage you to support them, but also to take from them and maybe do something in your own country, because what they do is absolutely fantastic. Emi and Ella, before giving you the stage, I want to start embarrassing a few people here. We have Salam Hamzageth. Thank you, Salam, for being with us. Salam is our tourism ambassador for peace. She will have the masterclass this evening, actually this afternoon at 3 p.m. So make sure you're not missing it. Don't eat too much and prepare yourself for a lot of questions. This is officially the first masterclass of the GYTS. Yesterday, we've done the orientation, we've done the introduction, you presented your country. I've been told you were very tired, and then please make sure that you know that we are going to continue the presentations of your video. We're trying to find a space for you each and every evening talk. So we're going to try tonight, and we're going to try on Wednesday for you to be able to continue sharing especially your videos about your country. So rest assured for that. But this is the first official masterclass, which means that they will be speaking, the speakers will be speaking for a certain amount of time, limited, because then there's going to be the time when, what is the time that is going to come? Thank you. So we're going to open the floor for your questions. So once again, ask anything you want. And please do that, because I think they're here for you. Salam is going to be leading her tourism masterclass on peace and her activities. And thank you very much for being with us today, Salam. We're very humbled. She came all the way from Abu Dhabi at 3 p.m. Yes.
I'd like to tell you all that Alessandra and the United Arab Emirates. Sorry.
Don't embarrass me.
No, you embarrassed me enough. We had an amazing event, yearly event called Small World in the United Arab Emirates, where we had people from all walks of life, just like yourselves, present their countries, their culture, their beautiful, colorful identities to help children all around the world. An amazing Professor Alessandra took pride in presenting her country, Italy. And she did a marvelous job in that. So a round of applause for her. That was not an embarrassment.
Salam, I'm never going to give you the microphone again. But thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. It was my pleasure at the time. I wasn't as young as you guys, huh? So it's just I wasn't like you presenting my country. Unfortunately, I was a little bit older. Anyways, I just want to make sure. Do I have Nina in the room? Nina, do I have to give any housekeeping information to these beautiful GYTSers? No? So it's time to leave the floor to Amy and Meek. Please.
Okay, hello. I'll just wait for this to turn on. Here we go. Okay. Hi, everyone. Yeah, thank you so much, Alessandra, for that wonderful introduction, and to Alessandra and the whole of the UN WTO team for having us here to speak. You know, it's an absolute honour to be representing the UK here, never mind actually having the chance to speak to you all about plastic pollution and how it relates to tourism, which is something that we're incredibly passionate about tackling, and something that I think hopefully everyone in this room can have a really active role in actually playing a part in addressing. So we're really excited to speak to you all about it today. As Alessandra mentioned, we are the founders of our own organisation called Kids Against Plastic, which isn't actually going to be the topic for our presentation today, because we did do a webinar in the run-up to the summit, the climate action webinar, all about what we do through Kids Against Plastic, and we don't want to repeat that too much for anyone who did manage to come along, so thank you if you did. But otherwise, if you're interested in what we do through our organisation, please do come and have a chat to us, or find our website or Instagram, and there's all the information about it there.
But we do appreciate that not everyone was able to attend the webinar that we ran coming up to Sorrento. So to start off with, before diving straight into plastic pollution and its links to tourism, we thought we'd go through a rough overview of plastic pollution in general.
Yeah. Now, as anyone who came to our webinar will know, we do like a good quiz, and we also like to get everyone involved, not just listen to us for half an hour. So we're going to start with a quiz, but it's going to be a slightly different one. We're not going to be picking on anyone, don't worry. Instead, it's just going to be true or false. So if you think the answer is true, you just have to give a thumbs up like this. And if you think that the answer is false, it's just a thumbs down like this, okay? So it should be really simple. So we'll start with a really easy question, just to make sure everyone understands. So we're going to be doing a quiz, true or false quiz on plastic pollution. Is that true or false? Okay, there we go. Hopefully everyone knows that was true, so a lot of thumbs up there. The next questions will be a bit trickier, don't worry.
Yeah, we'll get properly into it now. So
we'll
question
just wait
one.
for this. Can we have the slides as well? Thank you very much. Okay. Sorry, we didn't have that on screen. You're going to have to move off it straight away. Here we go.
Question one. True or false, plastic waste in the environment biodegrades? True or false? A lot of thumbs down, actually, yeah.
Okay, so the answer is?
The answer is false, yeah. Plastic doesn't biodegrade, it just breaks down into smaller and smaller chunks of plastic, which stay around polluting the environment forever.
Yeah, called microplastics, which it seems like everyone knew from the thumbs down, so that's a really good start. Okay, next question. So bacteria on plastic can give diseases to coral. Do you think that's true or false? Okay. Got a bit of a mix, but a lot of thumbs up, and it is actually true. So bacteria actually can be attracted to plastics, as can toxins in the water, and bacteria actually kind of hitch a ride, for lack of a better word, around the world on plastics. And so they can really spread diseases and infections to wildlife around the planet as well, which is definitely a bit worrying.
So question 3. Is it true or false that a truck's worth of plastic enters the world's oceans every minute?
Okay.
I feel like there's more of a mix on this one, which is interesting.
Yeah, I heard someone say trick question, but it isn't a trick question. It is actually true. So that's quite a shocking amount of plastic. So if you think of kind of big rubbish trucks that come and take your rubbish, that amount of plastic goes into the oceans every single minute, which means that every year we have around 8 to 12 million tons of plastic waste entering the oceans, which is an incredibly large amount. And that's just an estimate, and scientists think that that might be a low estimate. So definitely adding up to a lot of plastic. Okay, next question. True or false, a plastic bag is used for an average of around 20 minutes before being thrown away. So 20 minutes use. Oh, okay. This is definitely a bit more mixed. Interesting. Okay, now the answer is false. It's not 20 minutes, it's actually 12 minutes. So even less than that. And that kind of, we'll come on to why that's a bit of a problem in not too long. But if you think about it, that's a very, very short amount of time to be using a material which, as we discussed earlier, lasts on the planet basically forever. So on to the last question.
Yeah, the final question is, you have seen plastic waste in the area that you guys live. Is that true or false? I think that's all thumbs up there, which is scary.
Yeah, there's no right or wrong answer to this one, but I think that kind of gives us a bit of an overview of the picture of plastic waste around the world. And I think, isn't that a bit crazy? The fact that we all come from completely different locations, countries, ages, upbringings, and yet we've all come into plastic waste or plastic pollution at some point in our lives. And to be honest, that's not surprising if we consider the facts we've looked at already and the scale of plastic pollution and the global impacts that it's having as well.
And it's actually something that we've also seen clearly in the data that you guys have been submitting to our litter logging app. So in our last webinar, we set a task for you guys to log some litter running up to Sorrento, and so that we could see all the different types of litter that are found in different places in the world. And before we actually look at the data later in the talk, we did actually promise a prize for the winner who picked up the most plastic litter. So we'd like to invite Ilana up on stage to collect the prizes.
Well done, Alana. I think, you're in kind of the worst position, so sorry about that. But
Ilana picked up almost 40 pieces of litter in her country in Austria and logged it on the app. So these are just some things to say thank you and well done for your litter picking.
Thank you. Well done. Thank you so much. Yeah, a big well done to Alana there, and thank you to anyone else who logged litter on the app. Alana's pin is just here, but as you can see, there's lots of different pins all around the world, different litter picked up, which will come on to the types that are found in particular. But it's pretty clear to see from this and the facts that we've already been talking about that plastic litter is pretty much everywhere and affecting everyone. And it's on land, it's in our streets, it's in our rivers, it's finding its way into our oceans, and it gets caught in currents and carried around the world. And in some places, these currents move in circles like this, which are called gyres, which are created by the movement of the earth. And here, plastics can circulate for hundreds and hundreds of years and break down into smaller pieces, as we mentioned, called microplastics. And these aren't plastic islands, they are massive. Some of them are larger than countries or states in the US, like Texas, but scientists describe them as almost like a bit of a plastic soup in these locations with layers and layers of fragmenting plastics.
And this really isn't good news for us, and especially not for marine life. In fact, 90% of seabirds are found to have eaten plastic and have plastic in their stomach when they die. And this is predicted to grow to 99% of all seabirds in 30 years' time. And this happens when seabirds and other creatures see plastic floating on the surface and mistake it for food, especially when it's these bright, colourful pieces. And often they eat them or feed them to their chicks. And that can lead to starvation because their plastics are full of, their stomachs, are full of plastics that can't be digested and just stay in their stomachs until they die.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's not just birds that are being impacted by plastic. All sorts of different animals, especially sea life, are being impacted, one of which is turtles. Now, as you might guess, this isn't a real turtle, but a sea turtle was found a few years ago, which was found to have died from ingesting plastic, and they extracted the plastic from its stomach and they laid it out, and all the plastic you can see making up the shell of the art here is plastic that was found in the stomach of one sea turtle in the ocean.
But the impact of plastic pollution doesn't just stop there. In fact, it also links to one of the largest crises facing the planet at the moment, and that is the climate crisis.
Yeah, now most plastics that we see on our shelves and make up the products that we buy from the supermarket are what's called petroleum plastics. And that basically means that they're made from oil, and around 99% of plastics raw material is actually petroleum and oil and fossil fuels. And oil, as you might know, is a fossil fuel. These are some of the key materials that are causing the climate crisis and the emissions from it. And it's also what's known as non-renewable, which means that it's being used up by humans faster than it's being created. Millions and millions of years faster, actually, since oil takes a very long time to form. But despite this, as I said, most plastics are made up from majority oil, and so it's expected that between 4 to 8% of global oil production is used at the moment just to make single-use plastics. And as we know, plastic usage is unfortunately growing. We're seeing more and more plastics on our shelves and around the world. And so in the coming years, plastic production could actually account for around 20% of the oil that's produced on the planet, possibly even more. And oil refinery, producing oil, is actually one of the most intensive greenhouse gas producing industries out there. It's second only behind the power plant in terms of emissions per facility. So that means that in coming years, plastic production and its environmental impact and carbon footprint is also set to grow.
So it's definitely clear to see that plastic waste is having a hugely negative impact on the planet. And how could there be anything positive about plastic when it's causing all of these problems? But actually, if you just look around you now, put your hand up if you can see something that's made from plastic. Yeah, that's pretty much everyone. And if you have a think back to your day so far and your travel to Sorrento, then the chances are you've used plastic already in a way that's actually helped you. And that can be the casing of your suitcases, to a bag you brought with you to GYTS, or even the seatbelt of the aeroplane that brought you here. And even the chairs that you guys are sitting on have plastic part of their structure.
Yeah, plastic is everywhere in our lives, and that's not actually always a bad thing, because when plastic was first invented, it actually used to be advertised like this. So plastic was really seen as this revolutionary wonder material. I don't think we'd see adverts like this about plastic anymore. But this was because of a few key standout properties of plastic that make it just so brilliant. Now, can anyone here tell us what some of the things about plastic that make it so good? Does anyone know a property of plastic that means it's used for a lot of things? Yes, we've got an answer. Exactly, that's a brilliant one to start on. It's cheap. So plastic is so incredibly cheap that it can be used for even products like single-use ones which are thrown away so quickly. So that's a brilliant one to start on. Does anyone else have one? Yes.
You talked about how plastic bags are used for 12 seconds, and you also talked about that it stays in the earth for hundreds of years. But if you use it in the correct way, you can use it for hundreds of years.
That's a brilliant one, yeah. So its durability is a really good one. So as you were saying, if it's used for things that are designed to be strong and last for a long time, so things like construction materials, even things like, for example, we were mentioning chairs in here, we were mentioning seatbelts in cars, these things are designed to be strong and last for a long time, so it's important that they are made from a material that can last for that amount of time. So that's another really good one. Does anyone else have a property? Yes.
Hello? Some objects need plastic as one of the materials to create an object itself. So although plastic may not be a very big material while making the object, but it can really help in building up or producing the object itself.
Yeah, that's another great one. So that's a really good thing about plastic, actually, is it's really adaptable. So it can be used for loads and loads of different purposes. So like you said, in the creation of other things, we also see plastic used for a complete range of products that you'd think, you couldn't use the same material that's used for something really strong, for something that's actually used to package something like bottled water. So the fact that plastic can be used for so many different things is a really strong point of it, and is one of the things that makes it such a brilliant material. Now, should we have one more? Does anyone else have a property of plastic? Excellent, yes. Oh, we'll have two more then. We'll have these two.
Plastic is lighter than a lot more of the other materials used in the world.
Yeah, exactly. And that is a good positive for plastic, because transporting it can cause less greenhouse gases to be emitted than heavier items like glass, for example. So that is a really good pro of plastic.
Yeah, it's a brilliant one.
We got one more.
Same thing?
Same thing.
Oh, perfect. There you go. That was a really good one to end on, actually, since that is one of probably the best materials that uses of plastic, and actually is why swapping from plastics is a little bit trickier.
Yeah. So when plastic was being invented and there were all of these pros of the material, it's hard to think of why it could cause these problems that we're seeing now. But can anyone think of why we're seeing these problems? Based on what we've just spoken about the positives of plastic, how come it's become such a negative material? Anyone? Yes, okay for you.
It's because of mass production.
Yes, mass production, definitely. Having so much of this material and keeping on creating it from virgin resources instead of recycling it and reusing the material, just producing more and more and more, is definitely a massive cause of the problem that we're seeing now. Does anyone have any other ideas?
And recycling, like infrastructure, is not so developed.
Yeah.
It's not so well developed. It need to be. That's why we're just throwing the like plastic packets or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. And in some countries, they're doing a really great job of recycling, and then in others, it's really difficult to properly recycle your items. So there's definitely more we need to see in place to improve this recycling. But I think it's good to mention that instead of focusing on recycling, we should focus on reducing our use in the first place because of the production, as you're saying.
Yeah, yeah, but I have another really good one. Yeah. Any others? Yes.
Carelessness from people. Like people don't really think it through of how like plastic can be so effective into our environment. So they just don't care and just throw away plastic as if it's not going to do anything to our environment.
Yeah. That's a great one. And it also links to that, you know, we were talking about how one of the strengths of plastic is its durability and the fact it lasts for a long time. But if you think when people start to use it carelessly or use a lot of it or throw it as litter, that's when that durability becomes a really bad point about plastic, because that's when we see plastic items being in the environment for hundreds of years before they even start to go away, if they go away, if they just break down into smaller pieces. So another great one. Does anyone have one last one before we finish? Yes.
So actually, is a bad thing that most plastic products are produced to just a one-time use, and a really small piece were recycled.
That's a really good one to end on, actually. Yeah, so I'm really glad you mentioned that, the one-use plastics, which is something that we're going to be talking about exactly now. So that was the perfect feed-in. But what's interesting is a lot of those negatives and positives that you've mentioned and told us actually overlap a lot, which is really interesting to hear, because the things that often make plastic so great make it so disastrous for the planet if we do use it for the wrong things and when we use this almost miracle material for some of the wrong purposes. And exactly as you just said, those things in particular, if we can have the slides back, please. Those things in particular are single-use plastics and problem plastics. And I guess if you think about it this way, does it make sense to use a material that, as we've heard, can almost be practically indestructible, is incredibly durable, lasts for a long time? Does it make sense to make that material into one that we use for just 5 minutes before throwing in the bin, or 12 minutes in the case of a plastic bag? You know, it's not really rocket science to see why there's a bit of a mismatch here of material and purpose, and to see why it's causing such a negative impact on our planet, especially when you consider the fact that we're producing and discarding just under 400 million tons of plastic waste every year globally. And the vast majority of this plastic is single-use plastic, the kind that we use for just one use before throwing in the bin. Items like plastic bags, which we produce over 500 billion of every single year around the world.
But as we were talking about earlier about plastic being so cheap, because it's so cheap and throw away, it's not cost effective to actually recycle effectively. And this means that less than 10% of the plastic produced globally is actually recycled, with all of the rest of it being sent to landfill, to be incinerated, or just left to pollute the environment in the form of plastic litter. And if we go back to our litter logging app, if you take a look at the types of plastics that are most commonly logged globally, you can see that single-use plastics really top the charts, with items like cigarettes, food packaging, plastic bottles, and straws.
Yeah, and yet, despite the impact that we've seen that these single-use plastics are having on the planet, they're now so ingrained in the way that we live our lives and the types of products that we buy and use in our lives. So products that 50 years ago, perhaps, would have been packaged in a material that was strong and designed to be reused and refilled, are now packaged instead in cheap throwaway plastics. And because of the immense amount of single-use plastics that are required in our lives, it's not so surprising to hear that in the early 2000s, the amount of plastic waste generated rose more in a single decade, in 10 years, than it had in the previous 40 years put together.
And these plastics are coming from all different sectors, including tourism. And in a time when so much work and focus is being put on how we can reduce the impact that tourism is having on the planet, from the way that we reach destinations to the food that we eat and the carbon footprint of places that we stay in, it seems really crazy that plastic waste is one of the key areas that tourism is falling short in when it comes to reducing its environmental impact.
But if you think about it carefully, plastics are often involved in almost all parts of our travel. And that's from the items that we buy to take with us, to the packaging on food and drink that we're served on planes, for example, to the accommodation that we then arrive to. And I want you to think back perhaps to your journey here. So just put your hand up if you came across plastic, particularly single-use plastic, in the airport or the train station that you travelled from. Okay, that's a lot of hands, and we can put our hands up there as well. And also, how about on the plane or train itself? Who came across plastic then? Okay, slightly fewer. And what about your suitcase? Does anyone here have any plastic travel items in their suitcase that they brought with them? Yeah, it's so hard to avoid, and it's not something that we should feel ashamed about or sad about, because that's where we need to look at the solutions to this more globally to try and cut down on the plastics that we use in tourism.
So when we look closely and just pay attention, we can see that plastics appear all throughout the tourist journey and can be really difficult to avoid. In fact, the impact of tourism on plastic waste is so great that the plastic pollution in the Mediterranean has been found to spike by 40% during holiday periods.
Yeah, and now when we think of beautiful destinations to go on holiday in particular, I think one that's quite high on a lot of people's bucket lists is the Maldives as well. And the Maldives are known for these pristine waters and these white sand beaches, but not so much for plastic waste. And yet actually, surprisingly, plastic pollution is becoming a big problem for the Maldives, and not because of the inhabitants themselves, because the Maldives are home to around just under 500,000 people who live there, and yet they get over 1 million tourists every single year coming to the islands. And every single one of these tourists will produce an average of around 7.2 kilograms of plastic waste per person per day spent there. And if you compare that to the amount that's used by a local living in the Maldives, which is only around 2.8 kilograms of rubbish, you can really see where a lot of this pollution is coming from. And in particular, in the capital of the Maldives, around 280,000 plastic bottles are used in the peak season every single day. Now, the difficulty for the Maldives is that because they get so many tourists coming in, their economy is really tied to tourism. So it generates around 1/3 of the Maldives' economic output every single year. But it means it's kind of not as easy to cut down on plastic by saying, okay, well, let's just stop all tourists from coming into the Maldives in the summer. But it has meant that instead there's been a brand new island produced in the Maldives, and it's actually a completely man-made one called Talafushi. And this is where the majority of the waste dealing in the Maldives takes place and has done for the last few decades. And it's estimated that around 700 tons of rubbish are added to this island every single day. And the majority of it is dealt with by migrant workers who have poor wages and also very little to no protective equipment to actually deal with the toxic waste here.
But not only is plastic waste coming from tourism, it's also impacting it. So another example of when we've seen this case of the tourists actually being the problem is when we visited a small village called Arrochar in Scotland. And we stayed in a local B&B for our time there, and we took a walk along the shore, and we found so much plastic litter there that we went back and spoke to the person who is running the B&B called Christina about it. And she said that this plastic littering their shore isn't actually from the local people themselves, but it's being brought in by the loch. So any other villages or countries that are using plastic upstream are bringing this plastic litter onto their shores, and they're being left to deal with it. And they all come together for a monthly litter pick and try and clean up this mess, but each time more and more litter just keeps flowing in. And during our time at Arrochar, we decided to join in with the monthly litter pick, and we made this video, but just a warning, this was quite a few years ago, so we look and sound very young. So
Hi, my name is Christina Sanchez Navarro. I have Ashfield House B&B here on the loch. I moved here about 2 years ago and noticed right away, and it's in a fantastic place. I mean, as you can see, the scenery is gorgeous, but the loch is pretty filthy. And it's litter sink, so it's constant marine litter coming up. Started cleaning the beach about a year and 11 months ago.
Well, we tend to only come out for about an hour, and during that time we'd probably do about three or four bags each. I live the other side of the village, and when I walk along here, along the loch side, I look out and I just think I can't walk past it. The community do get involved, and they get diggers out at the beginning of the year, and we just keep plugging along every month.
I started it on my own just because I own the property, on part of the property, and I wanted to clean that part. And obviously there's a larger part that's the whole head of the loch.
We took part in Arakar's monthly beach clean, organised by Stella and Christina. It's only when you really try to clear it up do you realise just how much rubbish there is on the beach and how big Arakar's litter problem is.
Even when you dig under the ground, you can find plastic. It's just this ongoing battle against plastic that just keeps on coming in.
It's hard work, and it must be soul-destroying for Stella and Christina to see the rubbish replaced by the tide by the next week.
I think painful thing to listen to.
I think we were there for about less than 2 hours, and we picked up about 11 bags of litter just on our own on that litter pick. So it's just a perfect example of how the plastic pollution is impacting tourism, as less and less people are going to visit Arakar and stay in these B&Bs because of how horrible it is to look at the plastic on the shore.
Yeah, and sadly this isn't a situation that's actually being limited to places like Arakar. All around the world, a lot of popular tourist destinations are seeing a very, very similar thing take place in the places where they're based. Now, an extreme 2011 storm meant that an island, the beaches of an island in South Korea actually became covered in plastic waste that was brought in by the storm, and it meant that the island lost up to $37 million in tourism revenue just that year. And in the UK, where we're from, lost tourism revenue and clean-up costs of the litter on these beaches added up to around £11 million per year. And that's just for one small section of coastline in the English county of Kent, which is just a small fraction of the whole of the coastline of the UK.
So it's clear to see that tourism really needs to clean up its act when it comes to plastic pollution, no pun intended. But tourism is a big part of the plastic problem, which means that it can be a big part of the solution, and achieving sustainable tourism really goes hand in hand with tackling the global issue of plastic waste.
Yeah, and there are also things that we can all do personally to actually start to reduce the impact that plastic through tourism has. The first thing that we can do is just try and be a bit more conscious of the plastics and unnecessary plastics that we bring to the locations that we visit or go on holiday. Because even, for example, within the UK, we have a lot of different recycling and disposal systems just within countries. So if you imagine how hard it is to dispose of plastic correctly in one country, imagine how difficult it must be to get your head around how to properly dispose of waste when you go abroad to different countries with different waste disposal rules and different systems in place. So trying to cut that plastic at the source is a much better way to get around it.
And another simple step that you can take to reduce plastic's impact on tourism is to accept less plastic on your journey to the location. And we spoke about this a bit earlier, because on the way to holiday destinations, as we all found, there is lots of plastic and unnecessary single-use items that are offered to us on our journey and yet are quite easy to avoid. So just on our journey to Sorrento, we came across loads of single-use plastics that would have been really difficult for us to refuse if we weren't prepared with reusables to avoid it. So there were just plastic wrapped and bottled foods and drinks and no other alternatives. And so if you aren't coming prepared, that can be really difficult to avoid. So just refusing items that you get offered at each stage of travel can not only cut down your plastic usage, but also raise awareness of the main problem areas in tourism and plastic pollution. And you can also be prepared for next time you travel. So bring along a reusable bottle, coffee cup, straws, bags, and just make sure you don't accept any plastic that you don't need to accept, and have these items accessible in your hand luggage. And we call this actually being plastic clever, which is reducing your usage of those 4 main items in particular as a first step to taking action against plastic pollution. And plastic clever is a lot simpler and more achievable than plastic free, and is just a great first step to cut down your environmental impact. And the idea of plastic clever can be applied to all different sectors like schools, businesses, cafes, councils, festivals, more and more. And as we just highlighted, it can also be applied to tourism.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, we went on a trip to the Azores and we actually did some guides on sustainable tourism, especially for students with the organisation Discover the World Education. And we found that one of the key items of plastic that are also quite difficult to reduce are toiletries, which is something that you might have come across yourself. And so some of the alternatives that we were looking into through the travels was things like reusable bars of shampoo or deodorant or sun creams, and also things like bamboo toothbrushes, which are just really simple ways to reduce the single-use plastics that go into your toiletries bag.
And just in our hotel on Sunday night, we found all of these items in the bathroom. And this is just showing the issue that you face if you don't plan ahead with your packing. So single-use plastic cups wrapped in plastic bags, and all of the face washes and shampoos and everything all in plastic bottles. So if you don't plan ahead and bring your own, this is the problem that you can be facing. But it shouldn't all be just down to us. There are things that we can encourage businesses to do and hold them accountable too.
Now, the good news is there are already steps being taken in the right direction by business and countries around the world to reduce plastic usage. So if we go back to the Maldives in particular and the island of Talafushi in particular through that, so the Maldivian government have massively ambitious plans when it comes to dealing with their plastic waste. And that includes improving the recycling in the capital city and cutting down on the waste sent to the waste island and investing in $1 million waste management system that's used on the island. And they're also working on passing new plastic legislation. So it's now illegal to import lots of different kinds of single-use plastics into the Maldives. And just this month, they also introduced some of their first bans on single-use plastic items on the island as well. And so they really aim to phase out all single-use plastics by the end of the decade, which is a really positive and ambitious plan to be seeing. But as the Maldivian government themselves have pointed out, this action needs to be bigger and better, and importantly, it also needs to be something that's global.
And that's why global initiatives to tackle plastic waste are so necessary, to bring businesses and individuals all behind this common goal to reduce plastic pollution and protect our planet. And the problem of plastic in tourism is far too big for just one individual, forward-thinking company or even government to achieve. The scale of this plastic waste problem means that we need to collaborate and bring about action as a whole group.
And that's where things like the Global Tourism Plastics Initiative comes in. Now, the Global Tourism Plastics Initiative really aims to unite the tourism sector behind pushing for more circular uses of plastic and really address the root causes of plastic pollution. And so it aims to bring together businesses, governments, different tourism stakeholders, to take action and really take the lead in pushing for more circular uses of plastic. And the initiative has a few key aims partners through it, which you can see on screen here. So eliminating problem plastics and unnecessary items, taking action to remove single-use systems and invest in reuse and reusable models, engage the whole of the value chain towards to less plastic packaging, or more reusable or recyclable or compostable alternatives, taking action to increase the amount of recycled content as well in all plastic items, collaborate and investing in improving waste management systems, which, as we've heard already, are often lacking when it comes to tackling plastic. And then finally, the really important one, reporting this publicly and annually on the progress that's being made towards these targets so that we can all have a role to play in holding governments accountable.
And already over 100 organisations have become signatories of the Global Tourism Plastics Initiative and have shared their commitments to do these things that are on screen now, as Amy mentioned. And these signatories can be from all parts of the tourism value chain, from destinations to businesses and supporting organisations.
Yeah, and since we are at a UN WTO conference this week, it's amazing to see the UN and partnering organisations really leading the way through things like the Global Tourism Plastics Initiative. And I think it really gives hope to the pioneering potential that tourism has to be leading the way on tackling plastic waste globally. But a message that we always are keen to give through our charity, and one that we encourage, is that whilst government and business action towards reducing plastic waste is important, it's not something that we just have to sit about and wait to happen and wait for people to get involved in. We actually all have a massively important role to play in pushing for sustainable tourism and ensuring that we get to grips, particularly with the plastic that's being used through tourism, as a first step towards that.
And as we mentioned before, when we were looking at noticing plastics on your journey, identifying the plastic problems is a really key place to start your change. And that's exactly why we'd love to set you guys the task of keeping track of all of the plastic items that you are forced to use, or at least are pretty hard to avoid during your time here in Sorrento before the assembly on Friday. And we'd also like for you to be aware of what plastics you're offered on your journey home as well, beyond the summit. And this is a really important part of bringing about change, as it shows us what to aim for and breaks down what can be a really massive problem into manageable things to tackle. And after all, starting action with any small changes is much better than not starting your action at all. So we'd love to set you guys the task of making your own plastic diary and keeping track of any plastics that you have to use before Friday's committee meetings, where you can feedback on what you all found.
Yeah, this is something that the UN WTO team are looking for everyone to feedback on Friday. So yeah, just keep an eye out for the plastics that you're in use here. It shouldn't take long. Just being aware is the main thing, and just really thinking about the plastics that you come into contact with during your stay here. So finally, thank you so much everyone for listening so well, and we'd just like to end on a really general thought and a mindset to consider when we travel as tourists or guests to countries around the world, something that really builds upon what we've already done in some of the sessions this morning. So let's just really think about how we would like tourists to behave when they visit our countries, and really apply that standard to how we treat the places that we visit. And in doing that, we'll know that at least we're doing everything that we can to try and protect and preserve the places that we're going to enjoy and travel to.
And that's exactly what sustainable tourism is all about, just respecting people, communities and places, as well as the environment that we're visiting. So a big thank you to Alessandra and the GYTS team for making this incredible summit happen and for having us speak today. And thank you everyone for listening.
And I think we were going to have some questions if we still have time.
Yeah. What do you think is a realistic way to get rid of plastic? Because when I go to the beach, for example, and clean it, I'll just take the trash, throw it away, and then the government or the other people that are responsible for taking it out, they're not going to burn it and they're not going to recycle it. They're just going to sell it to underdeveloped countries. So what do you think is a realistic way to get rid of it?
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I think that kind of links to some of the key problems that we have with waste disposal in a lot of countries. It's a big problem in the UK as well. Because single-use plastics are so cheap and are so flimsy and thin, they often don't have enough plastic material in them to make things like proper recycling something that happens, because it's just not cost-effective. And so that's why a lot of governments, like our government, many other countries, a lot of that waste just gets sent to other countries, like you were mentioning, which is obviously a massive problem, and is not actually dealing with it, it's just putting it in someone else's hands. So I think that's where a lot of the solutions to plastic waste come from, the reduce side of it instead. So instead of thinking, how can we deal with this immense amount of rubbish that's being generated, which would be a problem if it was plastic or metal or any other material ultimately. It's the mass use of it that's the real problem. So looking at how can we put schemes in place that actually reduce that use in the first place. So for example, investing in public infrastructure that allows people to access reusable materials, reusable items through things like tourism as well, making it something that happens at resorts, accommodation, in cities where people visit. So really looking at how we can invest in preventing that plastic in the first place and avoiding it instead of focusing on the disposal, I think, is where a lot of the solutions lie.
So I have a really controversial and somehow nagged and criticized issue. Like in a nutshell, it's a really long question. I have taken some notes. So taking into account the opportunities of handling this whole situation of the getting rid of plastic and related with the plastic pollution itself, I'm telling this not just mainly through the word of mouth, but on behalf of all entrepreneurs that were representing their ideas on the World Economic Forum last year. And as far as I know, I reminisce on revealing and otherwise really queer key initiative about building and implementing, carrying out some artificial plastic islands. I'm not talking about this specific garbage page, yeah, but about artificial with installed solar panels, fabric, and accommodation, and it was made of plastic. So I would like to grasp your point of view about this topic. Do you think it's a great opportunity to solve that pollution to solve the situation related to the pollution by making those islands? Because, like on the other hand, like the possibility of tsunamis, of disasters exist, albeit it's a really palpable like advantages, some like solving the pollution, solving the situation related to the pollution, overpopulation, and from my perspective it's a great idea, but it has also like some disadvantages. So what's your point of view about it?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one because there are so many pros and cons to these kind of ideas, and there are lots of people coming up with really innovative solutions where they can use the plastic that's already around, because if we're being realistic, most of it's never really going to go away. So there are some incredible ideas. It's just difficult because we need to focus on trying to stop using plastic in the first place rather than use plastic that we've already produced. And so it is good to use for plastic that's already around and already been used, and there's not really much you can do with it, but I think focus on solutions needs to be a lot more on stopping production of it in the first place. But
yeah, I think like you said, it can help to tackle some other issues like things like overpopulation and actually dealing with waste. But I think the amount of plastic we're producing every year, we couldn't build enough islands from that plastic to properly deal with it. So I think solutions like that are brilliant if they go alongside other actions to, for example, make sure that the plastic that's being produced is a more durable or more recyclable item that could be turned into something like an island, like houses, because ultimately, plastic bags, for example, wouldn't be a great material to make something like that out of. So how do we try and make sure the plastics we're producing are designed for a purpose where they can be turned into something useful or can be remade into items? But alongside that, how do we reduce that and ensure that, we couldn't, the amount we're producing at the moment is just too much to put just on solutions like that. But it is a step in the right direction.
No es una pregunta, pero es un aporte, ¿verdad? El cambio del plástico para reducir comienza en nosotros, y también en nuestro país las autoridades tienen que ayudarnos para poder cambiar esto.
We don't speak
The
Spanish.
use of
I don't suppose
plastic
anyone
has
can
to come
translate.
from
Sorry.
us.
Thank you.
Sí.
So, I'm sorry,
que
we
el
didn't get
cambio
to
comienza en
translation.
nosotros.
The change starts from us.
El cambio comienza en
Can you
nosotros
hear
y
us?
nuestro país nos debe
The
apoyar
change
para poder
starts from
cambiar.
us. Our country has to support this change.
En nuestro país nosotros tenemos
In
una
our
ley.
country, we have a law.
Tenemos una ley en la cual en las
We have a
tiendas
law
se utilizan
for
bolsas de
which
tela.
in the
They use bags of
Bolsas de tela, así también como cartón. Esto puede también ayudarnos a reciclar.
so you can recycle all the materials that are used.
That's great. Yeah, I think it's really good because that's another aspect of it is, as we were saying, this change can't be something that, is just left to individuals. And so, as you said, I think that's where systems like that are really good to see. And I think you said reusables is one thing which is really good. And then actually, supermarkets are starting to deal with the waste and take it back, which I also think is a step in the right direction because I think it shows supermarkets the scale of the waste that's being produced by them. But I know in the UK we also have a lot of kind of greenwashing schemes through that where supermarkets take the plastic back and then you trace the plastic that's being used and it's being still sent to somewhere like Turkey, which is obviously not good. We need to be dealing with our waste ourselves. So I think schemes like that, it's brilliant to hear that you've got some in your country, and I think it's great to be supporting people with it. And if we just ensure that those schemes are ones that are actually good for the planet and good for people and are helping us in our journeys to reducing plastic.
yeah, like the plastic bag tax caused a massive reduction in the amount of people who were using single-use plastic bags, and that was really amazing to see. But that action wouldn't have come about if we as consumers didn't show that we didn't want to buy these plastic bags and use plastic bags anymore. So again, it just reinforces the point of action comes about from what we promote and the ideas that we spread as individuals and as young people. But without the supermarkets listening, then that kind of big change wouldn't be happening.
Okay, so my question is, your point of view, how to show government that the plastic pollution is actually a real problem? Because there is a psychological thought that we're recycling because there are different cans for paper, plastic, glass, but at the end, everything goes in the same track. So how to show countries or governments that plastic is actually a big problem?
I think that's a really good question. I think it's one that, to be honest, has no easy answer to it, because obviously, everyone here will have different governments, different points of view on issues which, we want to appreciate first. It's going to be a lot harder for some people than it would be for others. I think, to be honest, speaking from our experience with government, economic impact is one thing that's really powerful, especially when we look at tourism, for example, which has already been impacted by things like COVID and the pandemic. When we're seeing extra additions to that of something that if there was just a small investment which would have a big return on better waste management, on reducing plastics, then I think that, showing the economic value is one really important thing. And I think also with governments, comparison is another big thing, and especially when you've got initiatives like the Global Tourism Plastics Initiative. If you've got governments joining that and not others, and your government is being left behind or perhaps not being as ambitious as other governments around the world, I think that also has a really important part to play in seeing that everyone is keeping up to speed on where we should be with action, and actually being encouraged or perhaps forced along by seeing what everyone else is doing around the world as well.
Yeah, I think an example of it is Canada recently announced that they're going to be cutting out 6 of the most used single-use plastic items by December this year. And that is really amazing action that we need to be seeing, and hopefully that will cause other governments around the world to see that it can be done and that other countries are beating them to it, so they need to join in with that action.
Yeah, and legislation through that as well. So through things like, the Plastics Initiative, it's not something that's legally binding, for example, but the UN are currently developing legally binding plastics agreements, which is still being decided on how ambitious that's going to be, but something like that is massive to ensuring that this is actually followed through as well, because obviously that's the most frustrating thing when you push for that action and then nothing actually comes of it. So I hope that's helpful.
Oh, hi, sorry, I'm over here.
Sorry. Oh, sorry. Sorry, someone was waving a microphone. Sorry.
One question. You talked about that a part that we can do is trying to be plastic clever.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's of course like crucial points, like you mentioned airports where it's a bit hard, and some airports have like public drinking fountains, some don't, and especially after like security controls, like you have to empty a water bottle. How do you try to like get rid of that problem? Do you think it's up to just the companies, like the airplanes and the airports, to solve it and install measures, or are there any measures that we can take?
I think it's definitely, like you said about reusables, I know you have to empty them, but if there are any stations after checking in and everything that you can fill up a bottle, that's a great option. In terms of in shops though, we found that there were no options out of plastic, and there wasn't a water fountain in our airport. So that is really the stage where we need to be seeing more options implemented in shops and more alternatives being made. And there are alternatives out there like cans of water and everything like that that really should be stocked in these shops, and that's again where it comes back to us and consumer demand in showing that we need these alternatives in the airports and everything like that.
Yeah, I think it's almost a two-way thing. I think it's something that can't be done without business and airports, but it's also something that can't be done without individuals, because, for example, an airport could invest in putting loads of infrastructure with water fountains in place, but then if no one brings a bottle to refill there, then that's just going to be a wasted investment, and it's not going to be something that's picked up anywhere. So I think it's really a two-way thing. And also when it comes to driving that change, if airports are shown, or if they see within customers or people that use them, that this is something that's actually being looked for, that also has a lot of demand. Consumer pressure actually has, we've seen already, an incredibly important role to play when it comes to pushing for this change. So I think it's really a two-way thing in terms of the solutions, but also getting there as well and ensuring that we do see those solutions. I hope that makes sense. Is that clear? I think we've just been told that we need to finish there as well. I think Nina was... Are we finishing here, Nina? Yeah, okay. But
There's
okay.
one more.
Do we have
We'll
one more
finish after
question?
this
And then,
question.
okay, one more question, then we'll finish. Thank you.
How can we spread the use of reusable plastics and alternatives to plastic?
So reusables or alternatives? Oh, that's a brilliant question. I think when it comes to reducing plastic, sometimes there are really easy things that can be switched away from through reusables, which comes down to more behavior changes and encouraging behavior changes, which are particularly a lot of convenient single-use plastics, which often aren't as necessary. But then obviously there are places where plastics, also single-use plastics, are very necessary, and you need to have something that's single-use, otherwise it perhaps wouldn't have the properties that using a reusable would. And so I think in those situations, that's where using alternatives to plastic come into play. So things like aluminium, if it's recycled, things like paper, because as we said, a lot of the problems with plastic come down to overconsumption of plastic. So if we can cut down the amount of material we're using in the first place through using reusables as much as possible, and then what's left, what needs to be switched, can then be looked at for alternatives.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned about spreading awareness of reusables and alternatives. So I think it's all about just a mindset shift and our habits as well. So as more people become more and more aware of this problem and what plastic pollution is and why we need to stop using plastic, that's causing a shift in mindset and more people using reusables. So it's again just about carry on promoting the message of why plastic pollution is so bad, and then from that comes change.
I think we need to finish there. Nina was saying, I'm really sorry, but please come and have a speak to us about this. Obviously, we can talk for ages about this. But thank you so much, everyone, for your great questions, for listening so well. And thank you.